It's been about relevance, being useful, but not being made use of. This is a delicate balance. Even during this COVID pandemic, both sides have helped each other at critical points in time. If you have differences, work it out and understand that there's a much larger account and a much longer term horizon. We fully understand why in the aftermath of 9/11, America had to go. The question is this threat from terrorism resolved? The nature of terrorism has now metastasized and turbocharged with internet technologies. In fact, the risk has gone up.
This is Global Focus with Christopher Pyne.
Hello, I'm Christopher Pyne, and this is Global Focus on Sky News Australia. Today, my guest is Vivian Balakrishnan, who is Singapore's Foreign Minister and a good friend to Australia over a long period of time. Vivian, welcome to the show, and thank you very much for being with us.
Oh, thank you. Always great to see you. Blast from the past.
Thank you.
We've been up to a lot together.
That is definitely true, and I'm sorry we can't be together in person, but you know, it won't be too long before we can be again.
Hope so. Hope so.
Yeah. Vivian, the relationship between Australia and China is clearly strained at the moment, economically and politically. Does it surprise you that the relationship has taken this turn?
Well, first I would say, I'm not really in a position to advise Australia. But what I would say is share perhaps a perspective from Singapore, this tiny city-state in the heart of Southeast Asia. The biggest success story of the last 40 years really has been China after the reform started by Deng Xiaoping. And the result of that, and especially the last 20 years since they joined the WTO, China has become our largest trading partner. But the other surprising factoid perhaps may be that Singapore is also the largest foreign investor in China, has been since 2013. So the point is that from a Singapore perspective, we've got skin in the game. And our attitude to China has been to demonstrate relevance. So for instance, we've got three government-to-government projects. The first one was in Suzhou. It's an industrial park, bring in foreign companies, build manufacturing plants. Second was in Tianjin. That was an eco-city when this whole thing of sustainable development came about. And our most recent project was in Chongqing. In a sense, part of the BRI, but really an attempt to connect Western China. And through this new corridor, which we call the Chongqing Connectivity Initiative, International Land Sea Trade Corridor. Sorry, it sounds better in Chinese. But this corridor links Western China through into Southeast Asia via Singapore. So it's been about relevance, being about being useful, but not being made use of. So now this is a delicate balance which all of us need to find, and we've been able to find that. And I would say right now, if you were to ask me, I would have to say our relations are excellent. And perhaps a lesser known fact is that even during this COVID pandemic, at critical moments, quietly, both sides have helped each other at critical points in time. So there is a relationship not based on symmetry. You can't, because we are so small. It's not based on complete congruence. It's not possible. But we find ways to work together. And where there are differences, we work through them. So the point is that you have to treat the issues as they come up, the differences, as part and parcel of a longer term relationship that has to be managed. And, it's like a game in which the same players are going to be at the table week after week. And even if you have differences, work it out and understand that there's a much larger account and a much longer term horizon. So that's just my take from Singapore. I mean, I'm in no position to tell Australia how to conduct foreign policy. And
No,
Julie
and I
Bishop
wouldn't
and
expect
Maurice
you
Pyne
to.
are more than capable of doing this.
Yes, indeed, and my former housemate in Canberra for 20 years, Maurice Pyne, would not be appreciative at all of you giving her advice about how to manage the China relationship, despite the fact that she likes you very much. No, and I know how well you get along.
Perfectly.
Indeed. Well, I've been in some of those meetings of ministers for trade, defence, and foreign affairs, and I know how close you and Maurice are. So it's a great relationship that we've got.
Yes. Chris, you've been there. You've seen it up close.
I have, and enjoyed it too. The approach that you've just outlined that Singapore is taking with China, that's generally the approach of the ASEAN nations, that they all see similarly that they can have a relationship with China which doesn't have to exclude others?
Well, I would characterize the relationship with ASEAN and China along the following dimensions. First, China is now the largest trading partner for virtually all of us. But a more recent development, which may not be fully appreciated yet, is that if you ask China who their largest trading partner is, in fact, ASEAN has now overtaken the EU and the US. So this trade interdependence is real, and it's growing. So that's the first point, right? The next point is that even if you look in terms of China's Belt and Road Signature project, the key interest of Southeast Asia is investments, and particularly investments in infrastructure, in connectivity. And so there again, you see that there is an obvious confluence of interests, medium and long-term interests. Are there problems or differences? You know fully well that there are. But again, for instance, in the South China Sea, where there are differences over claims, for each of the Southeast Asian countries with claims, and I would exclude Singapore because we have no claims in the South China Sea, but for each of the claimant states, their differences, their disputes, even if you want to call it that, with China, are just one dimension of a much broader relationship, and therefore would be looked at strategically. And no one wants it to get out of hand or to disrupt the long-term trajectory of relationships. Now, one final point I would make about ASEAN is that ASEAN is very, in fact, insistent on maintaining an inclusive and open regional architecture. And this is something which Australia would be familiar with, because, I mean, you know that we've always been advocates, champions for Australia's economic and political engagement with our part of the world. And the same thing applies to China. So even as China is our biggest trading partner, even as China is a significant source of investment, and we are key investors into China, we want to keep our region open, inclusive, and that, of course, relates to the other elephant in the room, America, which has, in fact, more invested in Southeast Asia than America has invested in India, China, and Korea combined. That's another factoid which is not fully appreciated.
Here in Australia, the media commentary is very much that the only issue that people talk about is the tension between China and the rest of the nations of the Indo-Pacific. And the South China Sea is, as you know, often used as the primary example of tension. But what you're saying, if I can paraphrase, is that countries like the Philippines, Vietnam, Brunei, Indonesia, Malaysia, others that have claims over the South China Sea, see that as just one part of a multifaceted relationship with what is clearly the largest economy in the region and 1.3 billion people who aren't suddenly going to go away. So managing that relationship and that South China Sea tension is just another thing to discuss, as opposed to becoming the most important part of the relationship.
Yes. So it's viewing, it's a long-term game. You're not dealing with an adversary. You don't want to make them adversary. But it is a stakeholder And you will have differences, and there will be divergence. The question is, can you resolve it? And even if you can't now, frankly, territorial claims are very difficult to resolve. It may take years, decades even, and no country is going to walk away from claims, lightly. But it does not have to be an absolute block to ongoing engagement and building up those relationships. So that's really what's happening in Southeast Asia.
Do you think that there is a party, and you can't also comment on foreign policy out of Beijing, but would it surprise you if there wasn't a group in Beijing formulating now a dignified exit for both Australia and China out of the current imbroglio that we find ourselves in?
China thinks long-term and takes a wide view in geostrategy. And I'm sure there would be a paper somewhere in a drawer on what happens when we press the green button and say, hey, wait, the sun is out and it's good day, mate. When that'll happen, I don't know.
No.
But I hope it happens soon.
Coming up next on Global Focus.
We understand why they had to get out. Everyone wishes it was done more elegantly. We hope Afghanistan will not become another haven for terrorists again. It's not just a military operation. You also have to deal with the hearts and minds of the people. Frankly, America can't come to the table until it resolves its internal situation.
Well, welcome back to Global Focus here on Sky News Australia. My guest today is Vivian Balakrishnan, the Singaporean Foreign Minister. We've been talking about ASEAN, Singapore, Australia, the role of China in our region, and now we'll shift to the other great superpower in the Indo-Pacific, which is the United States. Vivian, the Afghanistan war has effectively come to an end. Taliban is back in power in Kabul after 20 years. I know you can't speak for all of ASEAN, but you can speak for the Singaporean government. Is it your view in Singapore that this is the culmination of the US completing its mission and now extricating itself from a very difficult conflict, or is it being seen as a significant defeat for the United States, which is going to take many years to recover from in terms of their prestige in the Indo-Pacific region?
That's a profound question. Actually, both Australia and Singapore, and you would be familiar with this, were part of the International Security Assistance Force in Afghanistan. Why did America go in? And why was Australia and even Singapore part of the ISAF? It's because of terrorism. In fact, more specifically because of 9/11. In Singapore's case, we even discovered a local terrorist cell. Fortunately, we discovered it before they could actually take any action. But even this local homegrown cell had links with Al-Qaeda. So we fully understand why, in the aftermath of 9/11, America had to go in. The question then is this threat from terrorism resolved? And the answer is that it's certainly the acute, immediate threat 20 years ago was settled. But in fact, the nature of terrorism has now metastasized and turbocharged with internet technologies. In fact, the risk has gone up, not gone down. But really, if you think, and here if you put ourselves in the Biden administration's shoes, the truth is they inherited a very difficult situation. Actually, they are not the first administration to want to come out of Afghanistan. So they were in a difficult pickle, and I think you as a former defense minister will know as well as I do, there is no easy, neat, tidy way to get out of a sticky situation like that. So we understand why they had to get out. Of course, everyone wishes it was done more elegantly, but that's more easily said than done. We hope Afghanistan will not become another haven for terrorists again, but we have no illusions that I think both in Australia and in Southeast Asia, we've got homegrown terrorists, we've got terrorists in our own region. And the question is whether, in fact, they will be activated or at least enthused by current events in Afghanistan to try their luck. So we'll have to be vigilant. That's what confronts us. As far as the people in Afghanistan is concerned, I think there is an emerging humanitarian disaster. We hope that the Taliban leaders, 20 years is a new generation. We hope that they will take good care of their own people. We hope that they will also build, functional relationships with their neighbors and the rest of the world, but time will tell. In the end, I think the other point is that Afghanistan has always been the graveyard of empire. The British discovered it, the Russians relearned it. It looks like America's nation-building effort there has been another footnote in history of this recurrent pattern. So there we have it, a difficult situation. We have great sympathy for the Biden administration.
Yes, it'll be very interesting to see if the new model for combating terrorism is similar to what happened in the Philippines a few years ago when the Australian government, the Defence Forces, provided intelligence, surveillance, support for the Philippines military in addressing the ISIS conflict that occurred in the Philippines. And you'd be familiar with that. And ASEAN nations lent their support to the Philippines government, which was a much more clinical and specific engagement as opposed to what happened in Afghanistan, which was something like 25 different nations joining the coalition, and whether we've learnt our lesson from that particular conflict. And of course, the point you make too, Vivian, is a good one. The Biden administration came to the Afghanistan conflict at the end. The Obama administration announced the drawing down of forces almost 10 years ago, and of course the Trump administration announced that they were leaving and allowed 5,000 Afghan Taliban fighters to be freed. So, I mean, nobody comes to this what appears to have been something of a fiasco with entirely clean hands.
It's a messy situation, and look, I mean, you mentioned the southern Philippines, Marawi. There are no neat surgical ops. When there's a terrorist attack, it's not just a military operation. You also have to deal with the hearts and minds of the people. And the solution ultimately lies locally. And that's where the battlefront really is. And it shows the limit of external intervention. And to assume that we can, do this remotely without leadership and resolve on the ground, locally, I mean, that's just a bridge too far. But anyway, at least within Southeast Asia, I think all the governments are focused on this. We've got good counterintelligence operation, information sharing. And Australia has also been a critical part of this, you would know from your previous life. And like I said, we're just going to have to deal with it and to get on with it and to know that this is a clear and present danger.
Definitely. The Biden administration, I think, will be quite different to the Trump administration in its managing of the Indo-Pacific, China, its superpower status. How do you see the Biden administration in its early days? It's only been just over half a year. Here in Australia, we see it very much as a return to a more consistent and probably predictable response to issues. How are the Singaporeans and the ASEAN nations in general seeing the Biden approach to the Indo-Pacific? And particularly, I mean, he has made the Quad quite preeminent in his and his Secretary of State's views about American foreign policy. How do you see that all playing out in the next three and a bit years?
Well, I share your view that at least in terms of style, in terms of the personalities involved, this is a return to a more conventional establishment, a more conventional way of operating the State Department. So, and you know, Anthony Blinken and the others, including Jake Sullivan, they're not strangers to Australia and to Asia. So that's
not at all
familiar. You're on familiar ground. But I would say that the real question for us in Southeast Asia is that actually trade and investment is strategy. And the fact that the United States, having been a key locomotive for the CPTPP, at the end of the day had to walk away from it. And mind you, this is not because of the Biden administration. It's not just President Trump, but even candidate Hillary Clinton, the former Secretary of State, in her campaign also had to back away from the TPP. Now, I know this is because of domestic pressures and the polarization and the division in the American body politic. And frankly, America can't come to the table until it resolves its internal situation, achieves unity of purpose, achieves confidence to engage in this. We have left the door open, certainly in terms of the CPTPP, for America to come back. I think both Australia and Singapore certainly hopes America comes back. But in the meantime, while America's out, what has happened? The RCEP was signed last year. In fact, China and Singapore were the first two countries to ratify the RCEP. Now, China has also told us that they are interested in exploring becoming part of the CPTPP. Of course, so has the UK. And again, as people, you know, coming from a city-state that believes in free trade, because after all, trade is more than 3 times my GDP, we have to welcome such overtures. Now, the point is that all these big things are happening, and America does need to work out its strategy and to understand that the game in Southeast Asia is trade and investments. So that's what we are waiting for. I would not lose hope. I will continue to make that point and to also remind America that the door remains open and you have a head start. Don't miss out. Because after all, the real growth is in the Pacific, and America is a Pacific power. That's my elevator pitch.
I think it's a good point you make. It's a good point you make. The truth is, Australia, Japan, Singapore, when the Trump administration withdrew from the TPP, the TTP, we made it clear that we believed strongly in it and that we would keep going with it, which I think was very important. Well, Vivian, you know, we could talk all evening. There's lots more questions I could ask you, but we've run out of time. So can I thank you very much for coming on Global Focus. It's great to see you again. Thanks, Vivian.
Thanks, Chris.
Thank you for joining us on Global Focus tonight, and we look forward to seeing you next week.